All right, without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker. We've got Leon Shernoff here, the editor of Mushroom, the Journal of Wild Mushrooming. He's going to be presenting to us about the mushroom's perspective on life. So yeah, I'll hand things over to Leon.
Thank you. Yes. Okay, thanks. Yeah. So actually, this will be some mushroom perspective on life. Okay, first of all, I run Mushroom the Journal. That's me. You can find us online, www.mushroomthejournal.com. And I actually have magazines here, and because one of them is this magazine, you can get Walt Sturgeon here to autograph it for you because he took this picture. And I actually have another copy with his picture on the cover. So yeah, me and Walt. And we are all here because we love and appreciate mushrooms in all their many forms and uses and perspectives on life. But the main issue that I actually wanted to talk about today was the question that you have all asked at one point or another, and you have all been asked at one point or another, which is it edible? And in recent years, this has been supplemented by the other two questions. Is it medicinal? And if you're lucky, is it chaga? And I wanted to talk a little bit about why mushrooms are edible to us or not edible to us, because first of all, it rarely has anything to do with us. So this is where the mushroom's point of view comes in. The mushrooms are usually more concerned with little critters in the forest than they are with you and me. And also to talk about what the mushrooms eat. What do the mushrooms consider edible? What other things eat the mushroom, and why, and how does the mushroom interact with them over that? So I wanted to start off with a little bit of what the mushrooms actually are. So the main body of a fungus is made up of these, where's my little light? There's my little light. These threads called hyphae. And collectively, these threads form a mycelium, which is the main body of the fungus. Sometimes you'll see them going through the outside of the wood that they're eating. And when the hyphal mushroom wants to reproduce, it sends up a mushroom or something like that, and it drops spores, and they land somewhere else and start growing new hyphae. And sometimes they're easy to see, like here. Sometimes they're just these wispy threads at the base of the mushroom. But often you can see them. You can find them when you collect your mushrooms. And it also means that when you get things like the old man of the woods, it's not growing this fur on top especially. Those are just the regular old hyphae going straight on through the mushroom and, coming out in clumps. So it just didn't hit the brakes in time or something. So this governs a bit about how, in large terms, they interact with their environment, they interact with us. Even the mushrooms that we think of as really hard and solid, what you have in there is not like hard, solid stuff. It's still these hyphal threads. It's just that they have really thick walls, and they've taken stuff from the wood that they eat and used it to make those hyphae especially stiff and hard. And whatever your mushroom is, it's up here to drop spores, to land somewhere else and start a new mushroom. So if you want to know where your mushroom is dropping its spores from, which is often helpful to identifying it, you take a look at where it generates the most extra surface area. So here you make gills underneath. You can make these tubes like the boletes do, or you can make a bunch of spines on branches like this hericium, and it's forming spores on the branches and dropping them off to go out into the world and make new mushrooms. Or some just skip the structural part and they make a big old bowl of spores. And when they mature, the bowl opens up and the spores can float away on the breeze. A lot of times it happens when they're impacted by rain, so they get a head start in terms of getting out there when it's nice and wet, and it's a good time for the spores to start growing. And stinkhorns have a different strategy, though in some ways it's not much different from some of the gilled mushrooms. So their spores, they make a head with all this green slime on it, and it's filled with spores, and it stinks like garbage or rotting stuff, and flies smell it, and they come and they land, and they eat the slime, they get the goo all over them, they land somewhere else, they scrape off the slime, you get new stinkhorns growing. Very effective. This is from 1815, this picture. Okay, so we generally have three kingdoms of organisms that are large enough for us to see. We have animals, we have fungi, and we have plants. And what are some of the differences between the kingdoms? I mean, what is the first thing that you think of in terms of differences between the kingdoms? What? Okay, face. This is actually kind of important because we don't know why fungi look the way they look. They don't need to recognize each other. They don't have eyes. They don't generally have large animals that go after them, so they have to look like a scary fungus to get away from it. But so one of the things that animals can do that the other ones can't is they can move around a lot. And no organism has a perfect metabolism. So we all have metabolic wastes, no matter what kind of living thing you are. And animals can do this thing where we leave our wastes on the ground somewhere and we walk away from them. Plants and fungi can't do that. So what the plants do is they pump their waste into these things called fruits, and they get the animals to eat the fruits and take the waste away with them. And fungi do this also. And a lot of them have this very generalized response where if there's anything in the ground that they don't like, they pump it up into their mushrooms for animals to eat and carry away, which is why you get told not to eat mushrooms, even if they're edible mushrooms, from a golf course, from a cemetery, from any place where they're pumping a lot of chemicals into the ground. This is why after Chernobyl, you had boletes from Poland that had something like 50,000 times the normal amount of background radiation in them. And they can do this trick where they get the animals to eat something and carry it away, because there's this bite here. Plants and fungi, you can take a bite of them, walk away, and it'll just keep on going in a way that we can't. We casually prune trees or other bushes, stuff like that. You can't do that with animals, or most animals. And so this is a strategy that is unavailable to animals. We can't make fingers that have, all our body waste in them and get something to eat them and carry them away. We have to deal with it on our own. And plants, like fungi, have a wide sort of variety, not even of strategies, but even of attitudes towards doing this sort of thing. And one of the things about the relationship between these three kingdoms is that, as you might have thought when I mentioned the fruits, we actually all grow pretty well in the wastes of the other two kingdoms, right? We casually fertilize our garden with all sorts of animal waste, spent mushroom shrubs, substrate also, and we grow fungi on dead plants and on also animal waste. So we've all sort of co-evolved to use each other in this way and get what we can from each other, which is not how we usually think about eating mushrooms. Who knows what this plant is? Yeah, this is giant hogweed. So coming from the purely human perspective, we are amazing eating machines. We can eat almost anything, including things that are highly toxic to almost all other animals. Who knows what this plant is? Yeah, this is celery. It's basically a miniature giant hogweed that's been domesticated, and its poisons have been reduced to a small fraction of what they usually are. The thing that makes giant hogweed most famous here is that it has this nasty chemical, which was not developed to deter humans, that makes you incredibly photosensitive. And celery also has that compound. It's just a lot less. But the people who harvest it and handle it all day have to wear gloves because they'll have the same reaction that most of us do to the giant hogweed. Fungi have chemical defenses, they have physical defenses. A lot of these tiny cups have these eyelashes all around them. And as no one really knows what they're for, but they do seem to do some good as far as keeping the little critters out of them, and at least from eating the middle, which is where all the spores are being generated. Who knows what this plant is? Wood sorrel. Who eats it? Yeah, it's nice. We say that it tastes lemony. We get that from oxalic acid, which basically, kills just about every invertebrate. No questions asked. That's why you never see this plant with bite marks on it in the forest. And because it is so effective, we have a whole bunch of not terribly closely related plants that produce oxalic acid. All of the rumex, your rhubarb, your dock, those plants, lamb's quarters, which is a very standard wild edible, and it doesn't even taste lemony. Also has the oxalic acid. It doesn't get eaten. And, I'm saying lemony, and we all just think of that as a flavor. And it is, as far as the lemon tree is concerned, it is an insecticide. And we've bred them for thousands of years and gotten them to make bigger fruits that have more juice and are more sugary, all those citric fruits. But, the original citrus was this little thing like a kumquat with this incredibly powerful skin, and we still pretty much can't eat the skin directly because it's just got too much of that stuff in it. But that's how these organisms are strategizing their edibility or their not edibility. And, originally it didn't have much to do with us. It's all about the tiny arthropods and other invertebrates in the forest that they encounter. Like this mushroom. What is this mushroom? This is the bitter bolete, Tylopolis phellius. This is a German field guide from 1902. And you find Tylopolis in the field, they're never buggy. We have this amazing digestive system. We can kind of eat them if you somehow manage to do it without tasting them. But, but it's still, a very horrible experience for us to taste them. But the bugs won't touch it. And that's why that chemical is there. We have a whole bunch of, let's see. We have, I think there's a jack-o'-lantern slide in there somewhere. But, we have mushrooms like the jack-o'-lantern, chlorophyll and molybdites, a whole bunch of entelomas. They'll make you throw up for days at a time. Why do they do that? Because they have really powerful poisons in them. And we have this generalized response that if your gut sees cells dying inside it, everything has to go. And, it doesn't need to know how it's happening. It doesn't need to know, what specifically is going on. Everything goes, and we live. Invertebrates don't do that. You never find bugs in your jack-o'-lanterns. You never find bugs in your Tylopolis, at least not the bitter ones. Chlorophyll and molybdites, a solid, beautiful mushroom right on your lawn, ready for you to take and experience the several days of violent purging. And they've been doing this for a long time. So this is one of the mushrooms that have been discovered fossilized in amber. This is a Burmese amber mushroom from 99 million years ago. It's the middle of the Mesozoic era. Mammals did not exist at that time. This is a lot right there with Allosaurus and Apatosaurus. And it pretty much looks like a regular mushroom nowadays. There's one called Archaeomarasmius, and they name them, and there are only a few, so we don't really know how to categorize them. But if you think of the organisms on Earth in the middle of the age of the dinosaurs, how many of them look exactly the same nowadays? This is an ancient and successful organism and an ancient and successful battle plan. And actually, some of the few groups of organisms that still do look exactly the same are the little bugs and other critters that, like isopods, that eat these. So they're sort of waging their war through the ages. And every once in a while, we get to benefit, and sometimes we get caught in the crossfire. So different mushrooms, I want to say that we also don't know what all the strategies are. We don't really know what's going on. We can see things happening, and we don't necessarily know why. I mentioned the stinkhorns, where they make this goo that is actually very nutritious, even though it smells disgusting. And they embed their spores in it. Gilled mushrooms in general are already doing this because the way they fire their spores is their spores are kind of sugar-coated. And what happens when you get enough humidity is the sugar absorbs water from the atmosphere and it liquefies, and as it liquefies, the water condenses and ends up collecting at one end of the spore. It's called the Buller drop. And then it flips the spore off the basidium into the air. And so these spores are, like I said, they're sugar-coated. So there are all sorts of little bugs that eat the spores because they're coated with sugar. And then they go somewhere else, they poop out the spores, you get new mushrooms growing. Some of them, however, are very touchy about being eaten. The amanitas with the amatoxin, that's responsible for like 95% of the deaths in the US from mushroom poisoning. That toxin occurs in different mushrooms all across the kingdom. And we don't know whether it evolved separately or whether there was lateral gene transfer, or we don't know the mechanism. But it appears in widely separated groups of mushrooms. So it's clearly adaptive. They're getting some use out of it. They're not all getting use out of it because some of them sort of seem to welcome being eaten. But, to some it is very useful not to be eaten. Others are very come hither. There are quite a few mushrooms that even glow in the dark, so they'll attract these little flies at night, which lay eggs and produce larvae that eat the spores and poop them out. And luminescence, again, is widely spread in the fungal kingdom. The jack-o'-lanterns will glow in the dark, so they're attracting bugs that are maybe not eating the mushroom, but they're eating the spores. And honey mushrooms. Honey mushroom mycelium will glow in the dark. We have no idea why. There's not a fruiting body associated with it necessarily, but they do. It costs it something to do this, so it seems like it should be getting some benefit, but we don't know what that is. But I'm just saying different mushrooms, they just have different attitudes towards being eaten. Some invite it, some don't. And I also just wanted to talk about other critters that eat mushrooms and what that does for the ecosystem as a whole. So this is a tree that has fallen down, and it turns out to have all these white fungal mats inside, and they've turned the wood black where they were eating it. And so it's probably this polypore called Bierkandera. But we get taught in school that, there's this food chain where the sun shines on the earth and the plants, they absorb the sunlight and they grow and they make, edible flesh, basically, and everything else eats plants. So we all depend on this funnel of sunlight through the plants. But a lot of plants put a lot of energy into making wood, and almost nothing else eats wood besides fungi. So one of the big theoretical arguments in the past few years has been, okay, we had this era in the past before fungi learned how to decay wood. And in fact, you can read in old textbooks in the US that the whole role of fungi is to break up the wood, because if it just laid around, then we wouldn't have anywhere to walk. And it's kind of stupid and totally ignores how they are symbiotic with trees in the first place. But we once had such a period, and it's called the Carboniferous period. And it was quite a bit before the dinosaurs, and there were lots of trees growing, and they just fell down and piled up and eventually turned to coal and gasoline, and that's how we got these fossil fuels. And that process seems to have stopped right about the time that fungi gained the ability to decay wood. So there are some mycologists who decided to point this out, and then the geologist said, no, it's all more complicated, and there's a big fight. But certainly nowadays, whatever else you want to say about it in the large scale, this wood is just going to sit around unless you have the fungi breaking it up. So there's also an old-fashioned attitude in the U.S. that these polypores and whatever that grow on trees, that they're called a disease of trees. And a tree that's being eaten like this is unhealthy. And that's kind of bullshit because, like I said, the wood isn't doing anything otherwise. The tree has been shown, a lot of the trees standing up, you can have just like 10% of the trunk being solid, and it'll still stand up, continue to grow, reproduce. And what the mushrooms are doing to the other 90% of that tree is turning it into soil. And you really want to get it turned into soil as quickly as possible. And if you do that while the tree is standing up, more power to you. And let's see, yes. So once you have a mushroom that is eating the tree, you then have other critters that can eat the mushroom. So you're also passing on the nutrients that otherwise would be locked up in that wood. So this is also crucial for the food chain in the forest, all that sort of thing. Okay, so do I have my nurse trees in here somewhere? Yeah, okay, later on. We have these invertebrates that eat the fungi and eat, they get to pass on the nutrients that otherwise would be locked in the wood. You also have plants that grow directly on the fungi. These are plants without chlorophyll. A long time ago, they were thought to be decaying stuff underground, just like fungi, but they're actually symbiotic with the same fungi that are symbiotic with the green trees, and they just sort of grift. The trees in the forest, when they're baby trees, they don't get enough sunlight to feed themselves, generally. They're at the bottom of the forest, it's dark, they don't get much light. They hook onto the fungi that are symbiotic with the big trees, and they go, hey, I'm a baby tree, feed me. And the big trees send them sugar through the mycelial network underground. So we've got quite a bit of research now where they've tagged sugars and injected them into big trees, and then they turn up in the saplings, and you can trace them traveling through the ground. So you have these plants, which are flowering plants. You can see they got flowers. They have vestigial leaves, even though they don't use them for anything. And they send down roots, and they go, hey, I'm a baby tree, feed me. And the fungi feed them. And we get these plants. So they are yet another organism that sort of eats mushrooms. Another organism that we don't often think of as eating mushrooms is other mushrooms. So this is that yellow bolete mold. And again, Tylopolis, they don't get this. I don't know whether it's the same chemical that repels this mold as, repels humans. I don't know, there are some amanitas that get their own mold, and those are generally edible amanitas in the rubescens group. So, maybe the mushrooms have similar tastes in mushrooms to us, at least as far as edibility is concerned. But, we really don't know much about this, or how or why these hosts get selected. So trees falling down in the forest, they get broken apart by the fungi, and you get new trees growing out of them. And such that these big trees that fall down, they're sometimes called nurse trees, because as the wood is breaking apart and getting, selectively eaten by fungi, it gets very porous. It holds water a lot better than regular soil. And so you'll end up, years later, with fairly big trees that are all growing in a row because they came from this one. They all started out on this nurse tree, and then the roots have to grow down over where the tree was to get to the ground, really. But you get this. And again, it's speeded up. This works because of the fungi that are breaking up that nurse tree and turning it into something that other trees are happy to live in. So now the next time someone asks you, is this edible, you can give them a really long answer and they'll never ask you again. But there's all sorts of eating going on in the forest. There is eating by mushrooms, there's eating of mushrooms, there's eating by organisms that we usually don't consider. And but they can all be lovely and interesting and beautiful, and we love them for it. And I run this magazine. And wherever you find your wild mushrooms, the invertebrates are in there with you, trying to get your mushrooms. And wherever you are, bullies make you happy. So, thank you. Thank you. Questions? I know that was all really tight and, well, yes? This is in Tibet. It's by Daniel Winkler. It's on his site. You can. I think this is actually called Boletus tibetensis. Yeah. Cool. Yay. But yeah, mushrooming is Daniel Winkler's site. He does trips to Tibet, or he did before the pandemic. And this is his picture. Yes. Question? Yes. Okay. Thank you. Wait. Yes.
The mycelium,
Uh-huh.
will like be on the forest? You know what I mean? Like when we say we are
Well,
solving development, we can throw under the other things.
you can definitely bisect the mycelium. You can definitely cut it up and create separate colonies that are the same individual, and if they ever get the chance to reunite, they will. But that honey mushroom, that I showed way back at the beginning, they can cover several acres. So, I was out once hunting in the summer with a friend, and we found these honey mushrooms, and he's like, where are they getting water from? It's completely dry out. And I said, they're honey mushrooms. They could be bringing it in from Michigan, So, yeah, the honey mushrooms, they're the largest known organisms on Earth. And, yeah. That depends. When you find these little marasmias or whatever, they're growing on leaves, they're just in the leaf. Okay. There are desert fungi that are symbiotic with the cactus and so on, and they go deep into the ground, and they take whatever water's in the topsoil and they pump it down below ground so that it doesn't evaporate during the daytime, and then they bring it up for the plants during the night. So it totally depends on what kind of ecosystem they have. so on. Yes. 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 Yeah. I haven't heard anything with bacteria. It's called a mycorrhizae with the tree and the fungus. And I didn't want the talk to get like really, really, really long. But no. But this is also an ancient relationship where the fungi grow into the roots of the plants, and the fungi get sugar from the plants, and they act as an extended root system. The hyphae that I showed you at the beginning, they're usually only one cell thick. So when they're going through the soil, they get a lot better local coverage of things that don't dissolve well, like minerals. So a lot of trees get almost all of their minerals from the fungi. They often get about a third of their water from the fungi, and the trees send them sugars in return. And it's not really as intentional as I sort of said, in that big trees sending little trees sugars. I mean, the big trees just send the fungi sugars, period. And then sometimes there are little trees that saying, hey, feed me, and then they get the sugar back. But it's, yeah, and that's the extent to which I know of that happening. So, yes?
You mentioned that the flowers, the chlorophyll is moisture.
Uh-huh.
Can you explain that more, what that relationship is?
Well, I thought I did. But those flowers, they send there are mycorrhizal fungi in the earth that are hooked in with the trees and getting fed from the trees. And then in turn, they feed some baby trees. And these flowers send the message to the fungi underground. They have the correct handshake, chemical handshake, to say, hey, I'm this partner of yours, and hey, also I'm a baby tree, so send me the sugars. And it happens. And yes, yeah. Yeah, they take advantage of the existing benevolent relationship by... There aren't a tremendous number of plants that do that. They don't seem to be able to get very much nutrition from the fungal network. I don't know if it's not easy to tell from one slide, but none of those plants are terribly big. You can't nourish a whole bush this way. So it's pretty much these things that are like 6 inches tall, and they're just funding a stem and a bunch of flowers. And if that keeps them going, that's enough for them to do. So sure. Yes.
Yeah, at least last year, this year was a really bad oil season.
Okay.
And Shernoff, where we live,
Uh-huh.
the area. And I was wondering if the cicadas that were underground had anything to do with disturbing the mycelium.
I haven't heard anything about that. I think it would be more an issue of how much the cicadas harm the tree, because the tree is basically what fuels the different mushrooms that come up. So drought is going to do a lot more than cicadas. When we have drought, we don't have a bad season just because there's no water. We have a bad season because the trees have had a bad season all summer, and they don't have enough left to really send to the mushrooms. Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Lovely audience. Thank you.